What if I told you that one of history's most feared political masterminds accidentally wrote the ultimate guide to building wealth in silence? Not a finance book, not a self-help manual, a 500-year-old treatise on power, survival, and strategy that, when you read between the lines, contains some of the most ruthlessly effective principles for accumulating wealth that have ever been put to paper. And almost nobody is talking about this. Niccolò Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513. He was a diplomat, a political advisor, a man who had seen empires rise and collapse. He understood human nature at a level most people never reach, and buried within his observations about rulers, power, and survival are 9 principles that, when applied to personal finance and wealth building, create something extraordinary. Silent wealth, the kind that nobody can see coming, the kind that protects itself because nobody even knows it exists. Before we get into these 9 rules, I need you to do something. If you find value in this content, hit that subscribe button right now. Hit the like button because it tells the algorithm that real people are watching, and it helps this content reach others who need it. Drop a comment below and tell me which rule you think is going to hit hardest for you personally. And share this with someone in your life who is quietly trying to build something better for themselves. The information in this video could genuinely change how they think about money forever. Now let us get into it. Rule number 1. Appear ordinary while building extraordinary things in secret. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the danger of appearing too powerful too soon. He observed that rulers who displayed their full strength before they had consolidated power were always the ones who got taken down first. Their visibility made them targets. The smartest princes, he noted, were the ones who moved quietly until they were so deeply established that challenging them became nearly impossible. Now apply that to wealth. There is a reason that the wealthiest people on the planet do not walk around announcing their net worth. Warren Buffett still lives in the same modest house in Omaha that he bought in 1958. He drives an ordinary car. He eats at McDonald's. And while you might think this is just personality quirk, it is actually strategic genius. When you do not display wealth, you do not attract the friction that destroys it. You do not attract jealousy from family members who suddenly need loans. You do not attract frivolous lawsuits. You do not attract bad business partners who smell money and want a piece of it. Machiavelli understood that visibility is vulnerability. The practical application here is simple but powerful. Stop announcing your financial moves. Stop posting about your investments. Stop telling people about your side income or your savings goals. Let your results speak years from now, not your intentions right now. Rule number 2. Never rely on a single source of power or income. Machiavelli was obsessed with what he called fortune, which he described as an unpredictable river that could destroy everything without warning. He advised rulers to never be so dependent on any single ally, any single province, or any single source of revenue that losing it meant losing everything. He called this fragility, and he despised it. In wealth terms, this is the income diversification principle, but applied with Machiavellian intensity. Most people have exactly one stream of income, one job, one employer, one source. And Machiavelli would have looked at that arrangement with genuine horror. He would have called it naive. He would have called it dangerous, and he would have been right. The average millionaire, according to various financial studies, has somewhere around 7 different income streams. That includes employment income, business income, rental income, dividends, royalties, interest, and capital gains. Each stream is independent. If one dries up, the others flow. This is what Machiavelli called resilience through redundancy. The action here is to start building your second stream before your first one feels comfortable. Not after, before. The time to build a dam is not when the flood is coming. It is when the sky is perfectly clear. Rule number 3. Study human nature relentlessly and use that knowledge to position yourself advantageously. Here is where Machiavelli gets genuinely brilliant. He spent decades observing how people actually behave. Not how they say they behave, not how morality says they should behave, but how they actually behave under pressure, under temptation, under fear. And his conclusion was that human behavior is remarkably predictable if you study it closely enough. He wrote that a man who knows human nature can anticipate events before they happen, and the person who anticipates can position themselves to benefit while others are still reacting. In the wealth building context, this is about understanding market psychology, consumer behavior, and the predictable patterns of how people make financial decisions. Markets do not crash randomly. They crash when fear reaches a tipping point and people start making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. Housing markets do not bubble randomly. They inflate when greed and the fear of missing out override rational analysis. The person who has studied human nature knows when to buy and when to wait. They know that when everyone is terrified and selling, assets become cheap. They know that when everyone is euphoric and buying, assets become overpriced. Warren Buffett's most famous quote, "Be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful," is pure Machiavellian philosophy applied to markets. Study people, study patterns. The knowledge of how humans behave predictably is one of the most valuable assets you can ever acquire. Rule number 4, control the narrative but never let people know you are controlling it. Machiavelli taught that the most powerful rulers were not necessarily the strongest militarily. They were the ones who controlled how they were perceived. He wrote that it is better to be perceived as generous than to be genuinely generous in ways that drain your resources. He understood that perception and reality often diverge, and that the strategic person learns to manage perception without appearing to manage it at all. Now, this is a rule that, applied ethically, becomes an extraordinary wealth-building tool. In business, brand perception is everything. The companies that win long-term are not always the ones with the best products. They are the ones that have most effectively shaped how people feel about their products. Apple does not sell computers and phones. Apple sells identity and belonging, and that perception allows them to charge premium prices while maintaining fanatical customer loyalty. On a personal level, this principle applies to your professional reputation. The way you are perceived in your industry, your network, and your community determines the opportunities that flow to you. People who are perceived as reliable, competent, and trustworthy get deals, partnerships, and opportunities that others never even hear about. The silent wealth strategy here is to invest heavily in your reputation and your personal brand, but do it quietly and consistently over time. Not through loud self-promotion, but through delivering real value repeatedly until your reputation builds itself. That compounding of reputation is perhaps even more powerful than the compounding of money. Rule number 5. Build alliances strategically, not emotionally. This is one of Machiavelli's most controversial teachings and also one of the most important. He wrote that a wise ruler chooses allies based on what those allies can contribute to his strength, not based on affection or sentiment. He was not saying to be cold or heartless. He was saying that mixing business relationships with emotional decisions consistently leads to ruin. We see this play out constantly in the financial world. People go into business with family members because it feels safe and comfortable, and then the business destroys the relationship because the professional expectations and the personal bonds create impossible conflicts. People make investment decisions based on loyalty to a friend's startup rather than actual analysis of the business fundamentals. The Machiavellian wealth principle here is to be intentional and analytical about who you allow into your financial ecosystem. Your inner circle should include people who challenge your thinking, people who have achieved what you want to achieve, and people who bring specific skills or resources that complement yours. This is not about being cold. It is about being strategic with one of your most valuable resources, which is your time and your attention. Evaluate the relationships in your life. Ask yourself honestly, do the 5 people you spend the most time with push you toward your financial goals or away from them? Machiavelli would argue that this evaluation is not optional. It is survival. Rule number 6. Be decisive and act quickly when opportunity presents itself, but prepare for that moment long before it arrives. Machiavelli wrote that fortune favors the bold, but more specifically, he observed that fortune presents itself as windows of opportunity that open and close. The unprepared person watches the window open and scrambles frantically to climb through it, usually arriving too late. The prepared person has been standing at the window, waiting, and steps through instantly. In wealth building, this principle describes the relationship between preparation and opportunity so perfectly that it almost seems like Machiavelli was writing a financial textbook. Consider what happens during a market crash. For someone without savings, without investment knowledge, and without cash reserves, A market crash is purely catastrophic. For someone who has been systematically building cash reserves and studying investment opportunities for years, a market crash is the greatest sale of their lifetime. The same window opens for both people. Only one is prepared to walk through it. The practical application of this rule requires doing boring, unglamorous work long before you need to. Building an emergency fund when your finances feel fine. Learning about investing when there are no urgent decisions to make. Developing new skills when your current job feels secure. The wealthy think in decades, not in moments. They prepare for opportunities that have not yet revealed themselves. Rule number 7. Know when to hold position and when to adapt, and never let pride make that decision for you. Machiavelli was fascinated by rulers who refused to adapt when circumstances changed and watched their kingdoms collapse as a result. He identified pride and what he called excessive love of their own way of doing things as the primary cause of leaders failing to adapt to new realities. He was essentially describing what we now call the sunk cost fallacy, centuries before behavioral economics gave it a name. In wealth-building terms, this rule is about the ability to change your financial strategy when the evidence demands it, regardless of how much you have already invested in the current approach. This is extraordinarily difficult psychologically. When you have spent 3 years building a business that is clearly not working, every human instinct screams at you to persist, to believe harder, to work more, because abandoning it means admitting that those 3 years were a mistake. Machiavelli would tell you that admitting the mistake now costs you 3 years. Refusing to admit the mistake could cost you 30. The wealthiest, most successful people in the world share a counterintuitive trait. They pivot aggressively when the data tells them to pivot. They do not fall in love with their strategies. They fall in love with their goals. The strategy is just the current vehicle. If the vehicle is not working, you find a different vehicle. Protect your ego the Machiavellian way by being willing to look foolish in the short term in order to succeed in the long term. Rule number 8. Eliminate threats to your wealth silently and systematically before they grow into crises. This is perhaps the most distinctly Machiavellian rule on this list. He wrote in The Prince that injuries should be done all at once so that being tasted less, they will cause less resentment. What he meant was that problems should be dealt with swiftly, decisively, and completely, rather than being allowed to linger and grow. A small wound treated immediately heals. A small wound ignored becomes a fatal infection. In wealth terms, this principle applies to the slow financial bleeds that destroy most people's financial lives. The subscription services that drain $30 per month that nobody uses. The high-interest debt that compounds quietly in the background. The insurance policies that are inadequate. The legal structures that leave assets unprotected. The tax strategies that are unoptimized. These are the small wounds that, left unaddressed, become catastrophic over decades. The Machiavellian approach to personal finance is ruthless triage. You identify every threat to your wealth systematically, and you eliminate them one by one with complete decisiveness. You cancel the subscriptions immediately. You attack the high-interest debt aggressively and completely. You get the proper legal and financial structures in place before you need them, not after a crisis forces your hand. Most people's financial problems are not dramatic crises. They are 1,000 small inefficiencies that compound over time into a life of financial mediocrity. Machiavelli would tell you to wage war on those inefficiencies with the same urgency that a ruler wages war against an invading enemy. Rule number 9. Build your wealth on foundations that do not depend on luck or circumstance. This final rule comes from one of the most important distinctions Machiavelli made in all of his writing. He contrasted rulers who came to power through fortune, meaning luck, inheritance, or favorable circumstance, with rulers who came to power through virtue, which he defined as skill, intelligence, and disciplined effort. And his conclusion was stark. Rulers who rose through fortune fell through fortune. Rulers who rose through virtue could survive even when fortune turned against them. This is the capstone principle of silent wealth. Everything you build on luck is temporary. The person who gets rich through a windfall and has not developed the skills, the mindset, and the systems that create wealth will almost always lose that windfall. Studies consistently show that lottery winners return to their previous financial state within a few years of winning. Because the fortune changed, but the foundation did not. Building on virtue in the Machiavellian sense means investing relentlessly in the skills and knowledge that generate wealth regardless of external conditions. It means understanding financial principles deeply enough that you can rebuild if you ever lose everything. It means developing the psychological discipline to delay gratification, manage risk, and think long-term even when the short-term is screaming at you. It means building systems, habits, and structures that work even when you are not paying attention. The wealthy person who built their wealth on a solid foundation of skill and knowledge cannot be made poor by a single event. They can lose money, they can face setbacks, but they will rebuild because the foundation is internal. It is knowledge, it is habits, it is the ability to see opportunity where others see only chaos. Now let us bring this all together because there is something critically important about how these 9 rules interact with each other. They do not work in isolation. They form a system. Appearing ordinary, Rule 1 protects the wealth you build. Diversifying your income streams, Rule 2, ensures that wealth cannot be taken from you by a single event. Understanding human nature, Rule 3, tells you where to direct that wealth for maximum growth. Managing your reputation, Rule 4, ensures that opportunity keeps flowing to you. Building strategic alliances, Rule 5, multiplies your capacity to generate and protect wealth. Being prepared for opportunity, Rule 6, ensures that you capture gains when the window opens. Adapting without pride, Rule 7, keeps your strategy aligned with reality. Eliminating financial threats systematically, Rule 8, protects what you build. And founding everything on skill and knowledge rather than luck, Rule 9, makes your wealth permanent. These 9 rules taken together describe something that most people spend their entire lives chasing without ever catching. They describe a person who builds wealth quietly, systematically, and durably. A person who does not announce what they are doing. A person who does not need external validation for their financial decisions. A person who moves in silence and lets the results speak for themselves years later. Machiavelli wrote for princes, but the real prince of the modern age is not a ruler of a kingdom. The real prince is the person who takes full sovereignty over their own financial life. The person who refuses to be controlled by circumstance, by the opinions of others, by the cultural pressure to display wealth before it is real. The person who is playing a long game while everyone else is playing for the weekend. I want to ask you something honestly. How many of these 9 rules are you currently applying to your own life? Be honest with yourself, because there is probably a gap between where you are and where Machiavelli's framework says you could be. And that gap is not a judgment, it is an invitation. The beautiful thing about these principles is that every single one of them is actionable starting today. You do not need to be wealthy to stop announcing your financial intentions. You do not need to be wealthy to start building a second income stream, even a small one. You do not need to be wealthy to start studying human psychology and market behavior. You do not need to be wealthy to begin protecting your reputation strategically. You do not need to be wealthy to start evaluating your relationships with brutal honesty. You do not need to be wealthy to start preparing for opportunities that do not yet exist. You do not need to be wealthy to develop the flexibility to change your strategy when the evidence demands it. And you absolutely do not need to be wealthy to start investing in the skills and knowledge that make wealth possible. Every person who is genuinely wealthy today started applying principles like these when they had nothing. The wealth came later. The principles came first. This is what Machiavelli understood about power that most people never understand about money. It is not the resource itself that matters most. It is the quality of thinking that generates and sustains the resource. Change the thinking and you change the outcome. Not immediately, not dramatically, quietly, systematically, permanently. Machiavelli wrote in silence, exiled from the power he had spent his life serving, turning his observations into principles that would outlast every ruler he had ever known by 5 centuries. There is something poetic about the fact that his most enduring contribution was not political power at all. It was the map for anyone willing to read between the lines. The question is whether you are willing to read between the lines. If this video gave you a new perspective on wealth, on strategy, or on how to think about your own financial journey, do 3 things right now. First, subscribe to this channel. because we go deep on the ideas, principles, and frameworks that the most successful people in history used to build extraordinary lives. Second, like this video because it helps real people who need this kind of content actually find it. And third, share this with one person in your life who you think is ready to hear it. Not everyone is. But the ones who are, this kind of thinking changes everything for them. Comment below with one rule from Machiavelli's 9 that you are committing to apply this week. Just one. The rule you commit to today is the one that compounds into something extraordinary 5 years from now. Machiavelli said that there is nothing more difficult to carry out, nor more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things. Building wealth quietly is a new order. It goes against everything your culture tells you to do with success. But then, Machiavelli never cared much about what culture told him to do. He cared about what worked, and now you know what works.